Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an incredible and moving story that will touch your heart. Let's meet Chris Harrington, a woman who went through one of the most challenging moments of her life during an emergency cesarean section, when she literally faced death and was welcomed by Jesus in a completely unexpected way. What she saw on the other side will completely change her view of divine love. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impactful content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this journey of faith and transformation. My name is Chris Harrington, and today I want to share with you an experience that completely changed my life and my perspective on the world. It happened a few years ago, during the birth of my son Nathaniel, but the memories and feelings of that day remain as vivid in my mind as if it had happened yesterday. I grew up in a traditional Catholic family, but I confess that over the years, I moved away from the church and the faith. Life presented me with challenges that made me question everything I believed. I went through a painful divorce in the late 1970s, which left me with a deep sense of failure. After that, I had 2 relationships that resulted in miscarriages, decisions that haunted me for a long time. When I got pregnant for the 3rd time, I was almost 40 years old. I decided that this time it would be different. I would have this baby, even if it meant raising it alone. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning, with several complications that made me apprehensive, but nothing could prepare me for what was to come. On the day of the birth, after 29 hours of exhausting labor, doctors decided that an emergency cesarean section was the only option. My baby was stuck in the birth canal and my body couldn't take it anymore. It was at this critical moment that my life took an unexpected turn, and I was taken on a journey that challenged everything I thought I knew about life, death, and divine love. What I'm going to tell you below may seem unbelievable to some, but I can assure you that every word is true. This experience not only saved my life and that of my son, but it also gave me a new understanding of the purpose of my existence and the unconditional love that exists beyond this material world. I vividly remember the moments leading up to my near-death experience. The operating room was controlled chaos, with doctors and nurses moving quickly around me. Dr. Evelyn Thatcher, the surgeon in charge, had a look of concern on her face that she couldn't hide. The sound of machines and monitors filled the environment, creating a tense and urgent symphony. As the anesthesia began to take effect, I felt a deep fear come over me. It wasn't just fear of the procedure itself, but an existential dread that I had never experienced before. It was as if, somehow, my deepest being knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. The voices around me began to become distant, and my vision became blurred. The last thing I remember before leaving was a thought about my unborn baby. I wanted so badly to meet him, to hold him in my arms. With this burning desire in my heart, I closed my eyes, hoping to wake up soon with my son by my side. But what happened next was something no book, film, or story could have prepared me for. Suddenly, I had the strangest, most surreal sensation of floating above my own body. It was as if I had separated myself from him, but still kept my consciousness intact. I looked down and saw the scene that, moments before, I was experiencing from a completely different perspective. There was my body, lying on the operating table, still and pale. The medical team worked frantically, their voices now muffled as if they were coming from far away. I could see Dr. Thatcher giving orders, her hands moving with precision as she performed the cesarean section. It was an indescribable feeling. I felt no pain, fear, or any physical discomfort. It was as if I was watching a film in which I was the protagonist, but without being able to interfere in the plot. I tried to get their attention, to shout that I was there, that I could see everything, but no sound came from me. I was just a silent observer of my own struggle for life. At that moment, I understood that something was deeply wrong. This was not how surgery was supposed to be. The urgency in the medical team's movements, the heart monitor emitting alarming signals, everything indicated that both my life and that of my baby were in imminent danger. It was then that I realized I was experiencing what many call an out-of-body experience. I was literally outside my body, witnessing my own imminent death. The realization of this should have filled me with dread, but strangely, I felt a surreal calm wash over me. It was like a part of me knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. As I watched the surgery scene below me, something began to change. The operations room, with all its frenetic activity, began to dissipate like mist at dawn. Gradually, I was enveloped by a deep and absolute darkness. It wasn't like closing your eyes in a dark room. It was a total absence of light that seemed to swallow everything around me. In this darkness, I lost all sense of space and time. There was no longer up or down, left or right. It was as if I were suspended in an infinite void. At first, this sensation was disconcerting. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything to break the oppressive darkness, but it was as if I no longer had a body to control. The silence was deafening. There was no beeping of hospital machines, no doctors' voices, just a silence so profound it seemed to have its own weight. It was at that moment that fear began to take over me. A primordial, visceral fear, unlike anything I had ever experienced in life. Thoughts started racing through my mind. Could this be the end? Was this what death felt like? Would darkness and emptiness be my eternal destiny? Years of religious teachings came back to me, and I began to wonder if this was the hell I feared so much in my youth. After all, I had left the church, committed acts that I considered sinful. Would this be my punishment? Guilt and regret flooded me. I thought about the abortions I had had, the people I had hurt throughout my life, the missed opportunities to do good. Every mistake, every wrong decision seemed to weigh on me in that dark void. In my desperation, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. It wasn't a formal or elaborate prayer, but a desperate cry from the depths of my soul. God, please don't send me to hell. I cried out into the darkness. My words, or rather my thoughts, seemed to get lost in that infinite vastness. But somehow I felt like I was heard. It was then that something extraordinary happened. In the midst of that impenetrable darkness, I noticed a tiny point of light. It was so small and far away that at first I thought it was just my imagination desperate for any sign of hope. But as I focused on it, I realized it was real. That point of light, no matter how small, was like a beacon on a stormy night. Its mere existence broke the hold fear had on me. I felt an irresistible urge to move toward her. I don't know how, since I no longer had a physical body, but I began to move towards that light. Each step towards the light was a fight against the fear and darkness that seemed to want to keep me trapped. But the closer I got, the more I felt a sense of peace and comfort enveloping me. It was as if that little light was calling me, guiding me to something beyond my understanding. As I got closer to the light, it got brighter and bigger. What was once just a tiny dot on the horizon of darkness was now expanding, enveloping me in its comforting glow. It was a light unlike anything I had ever seen before, not blinding or painful to the eyes, but soft, welcoming, and inexplicably alive. As I got closer, I began to feel a deep shift within me. The fear that consumed me in the darkness dissipated, giving way to a feeling of peace and serenity that I had never experienced before. It was as if each step toward the light was washing my soul, removing layers of guilt, regret, and pain that I had carried for so long. The light did not have a defined shape, but seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. Colors I had never seen before danced across its surface, creating complex, beautiful patterns that seemed to contain all the knowledge in the universe. It was mesmerizing and at the same time deeply comforting. As I merged with this light, I was overcome with an overwhelming feeling of unconditional love. It was a love so pure and intense that it made any love I had ever experienced on earth pale in comparison. This love did not judge, did not condemn. It simply accepted and embraced my entire being, with all my flaws and imperfections. In that moment, I had a deep understanding that everything was interconnected. I could feel the unity of all existence, as if every particle in the universe was linked by invisible threads of love and consciousness. My life, with all its joys and sorrows, seemed to be part of a larger and more beautiful pattern than I could have ever imagined. As I was immersed in this light, I began to see glimpses of knowledge that went beyond my earthly understanding. It was as if all the wisdom in the universe was at my fingertips. I understood the purpose behind each challenge I faced in life. I saw how each choice I made, good or bad, contributed to my growth and evolution. It was in this state of ecstasy and understanding that he appeared. I cannot say that I saw him with my eyes, as I no longer had a physical body. It was more like a perception, an awareness of his presence. Jesus did not present himself as the figure I knew from the paintings and statues in the church. He was pure energy, pure love, manifesting in ways that my human mind could barely comprehend. His presence further intensified the feeling of love and acceptance I was already experiencing. There was no judgment. There was no condemnation for the mistakes I made in life. Just a love so deep and unconditional that it made me realize how hard I had been on myself all these years. At that moment, I understood the true meaning of forgiveness. It was not something that needed to be asked or granted. It was a natural state of divine love. All my sins, all my failures, seemed insignificant in the face of this infinite love. I realized that I had been forgiven long before I asked for forgiveness, that this love had always been there, waiting for me to recognize and accept it. The presence of Jesus brought me a deep understanding that life is a journey of learning and growth. Every challenge, every mistake, every moment of pain had a greater purpose, to bring us back to that divine love, to remind us of our true nature. In that moment of communion with the divine, I felt complete, at peace, as if I had finally returned home after a long journey. My entire earthly life seemed like a brief moment compared to the eternity I felt in that state of grace. As I was immersed in that divine light, experiencing a love and peace that transcended anything I had ever known, I realized I was faced with a crucial choice. Suddenly, I felt the presence of two spiritual beings next to me. They had no defined physical form. They were more like pure consciousnesses that communicated with me without words. These beings, who I understood to be a kind of spiritual guides, presented me with a decision that I needed to make. They didn't speak out loud, but somehow I understood perfectly what they were saying. The message was clear. I could choose to remain in that state of eternal bliss, continuing my journey on the spiritual plane, or I could return to my earthly life. The temptation to stay was almost irresistible. There, in that light, I felt complete, free from all the suffering and limitations that physical life imposes. The love he experienced was so deep and all-encompassing that the thought of leaving him seemed almost unbearable. Plus, I had a feeling that if I stayed, I could continue to learn and evolve in ways that my earthly mind could barely comprehend. However, while considering this option, something unexpected happened. The image of my unborn son, Nathaniel, came into my consciousness. It was as if, even from that spiritual plane, I could feel his presence, his fight for life. I remembered the danger he was in, the emergency surgery that was happening to bring him into the world. At that moment, I felt an intense internal conflict. On the one hand, the desire to remain in that state of eternal peace and love was overwhelming. On the other hand, maternal love, a different but equally powerful love, pulled me back to earth. Nathaniel needed me. He was about to be born into a world full of challenges and uncertainty, and the thought of leaving him to face all of this alone broke my heart. The spiritual beings, realizing my dilemma, did not try to influence my decision. They simply radiated understanding and support, whatever my choice. I understood that this was a decision that only I could make. I turned my attention to Jesus, that loving presence that had enveloped me moments before. There were no words, but I felt like he was giving me a message of encouragement. It was as if he was telling me that regardless of my choice, his love would always be with me. With tears that were not physical, but emanated from the very essence of my being, I made my decision. I chose to return. I chose life, with all its challenges and uncertainties. I chose to be there for my son, to raise him, to love him, and most importantly, to share with him the divine love that I had experienced. The moment I made this choice, I felt a wave of love and approval coming from all the spiritual presences around me. There was no judgment, just acceptance and support. I understood that returning to life did not mean leaving that love behind. Instead, I was taking with me a spark of that divine love, a connection that would last forever. As I prepared to return, I made a silent promise. I promised that if my son survived, I would dedicate my life to sharing the love and understanding I had experienced. I promised I would raise Nathaniel knowing this divine love, this connection to something greater than ourselves. With this promise in my heart and the vivid memory of the unconditional love I had experienced, I began my journey back to the physical world. The light began to fade, but unlike the frightening darkness I had experienced before, I now felt enveloped in a deep peace. I knew I was carrying something precious with me, something that would change my life and the lives of those around me forever. The process of returning to my physical body was an intense and disorienting experience. As the celestial light receded, I felt like I was being pulled back through a dark tunnel. But this time, the darkness didn't scare me. I carried with me the certainty of the divine love I had experienced. When I finally re-entered my body, the feeling was overwhelming. It was as if every cell of my being was awakening simultaneously. The first thing I felt was pain, a sharp physical pain that contrasted sharply with the peace I had experienced moments before. My body felt heavy, limited, almost like a prison after the freedom I had experienced on the spiritual plane. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking several times to adjust my vision to the bright light of the operating room. The sounds around me, which had previously seemed distant and muffled, were now clear and almost deafening. The beeping of machines, the voices of doctors and nurses, everything seemed amplified. The first thing I did, as soon as I could focus my thoughts, was to ask about my son. My voice was hoarse and weak, but the urgency in my tone was evident. "My baby, where's my baby?" I managed to mumble. Dr. Thatcher approached me, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Mrs. Harrington," she said softly, "your son is alive, but in critical condition. He is in the NICU right now. We have done everything we can, but the next 48 hours will be crucial." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Nathaniel was alive, but still in danger. The doctor continued, explaining that my son only had a 50% chance of survival. He had been born prematurely and with complications resulting from a difficult birth. As Dr. Thatcher spoke, I struggled to process everything that was happening. On the one hand, I was deeply grateful to be alive and that my son had survived birth. On the other, the fear of losing him was overwhelming. It was at that moment that I vividly remembered the promise I had made during my near-death experience. I closed my eyes for a moment, reliving the feeling of unconditional love I had experienced. Silently, I said a prayer. It was not a desperate prayer like before, but a sincere and trusting communication with the divine that I now knew existed. "God," I thought, "if you save my son, I promise I will do everything I can to let him know the love I experienced. Help him survive, and I will dedicate my life to sharing that love with him and the world." I opened my eyes, feeling a new strength fill me. Despite the physical pain and exhaustion, there was an inner peace that sustained me. I knew that no matter what happened, I was not alone on this journey. The love I had experienced was with me, giving me the strength to face whatever lay ahead. In the days that followed, I went through a roller coaster of emotions. Recovery from surgery was difficult, and anxiety about Nathaniel's condition was constant. I couldn't see him right away, which made the wait even more agonizing. But in every moment of doubt or fear, I clung to the memory of that light, that unconditional love I had experienced. I talked to psychologists and spiritual counselors at the hospital, trying to process everything I had experienced. Many seemed skeptical when I mentioned my near-death experience, but that didn't shake my certainty. I knew what I had experienced, and this certainty gave me the strength to continue fighting for myself and my son. The days following my return were a mix of anxiety, hope, and newfound faith. Nathaniel remained in the neonatal ICU, fighting for his life every minute. I spent as much time as possible next to his incubator, talking softly to him, singing softly, and most of all, praying. My relationship with prayer had completely changed after my experience. It was no longer a mechanical ritual or a desperate plea to a distant God. Now, it was an intimate conversation with a presence that I knew was real and loving. I spoke to God as if I were speaking to a close friend, sharing my fears, my hopes, and most of all, my love for Nathaniel. On the third day after birth, something happened that doctors would later call inexplicable. I was sitting next to Nathaniel's incubator, as usual, when I noticed a subtle change. Her little fingers, which had previously seemed so fragile and immobile, made a slight movement. It was almost imperceptible, but to me, it was as if the entire world had stopped. I called the nurse immediately, barely able to contain my excitement. She examined Nathaniel and, to my surprise and delight, confirmed that his vital signs were improving significantly. In the hours that followed, my little warrior continued to show signs of recovery that left the medical team perplexed. The next day, Dr. Thatcher entered the room with a smile on her face that I had never seen before. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, "I don't know how to explain this, but your son is responding in a way we have never seen before in such a critical case. His vital functions are quickly stabilizing, and if he continues like this, we may be able to get him out. You from life support soon." Tears of joy and gratitude ran down my face. I knew in my heart that this was more than luck or medical science. It was the miracle I had prayed for, the manifestation of that unconditional love I had experienced during my journey beyond life. In the days that followed, Nathaniel continued to surprise everyone with his recovery. Every little progress was celebrated. The first moment he opened his eyes, the first cry, the first time he could breathe without the help of life support. Each milestone was a confirmation of the miracle we were experiencing. Finally, 2 weeks after birth, I received the news I had been waiting for. Nathaniel was out of danger and could leave the ICU. When I held him in my arms for the first time with no tubes or monitors between us, it was like the whole world made sense again. I looked at his perfect little face and saw in it the reflection of the divine love I had experienced. At that moment, I silently renewed the promise I had made. I promised Nathaniel and God that I would dedicate my life to sharing that love, to teaching about the beauty and reality of the spiritual world I had glimpsed. I knew that our journey was just beginning, but now I was sure that no matter what the future held, we would always be surrounded by that unconditional love. Nathaniel's miraculous recovery not only solidified my faith, but also touched the lives of many around us. Nurses, doctors, and even other parents in the NICU commented on the aura of peace that seemed to surround us. Many approached me to talk, curious about the source of my strength and serenity in the face of such challenging circumstances. It was in these conversations that I began to realize that my experience was not just for me. It was something that needed to be shared, a light that could bring hope and comfort to others going through difficult times. Each person who approached, seeking to understand our story, was a confirmation of the mission that I now knew was ahead of me. In the months following our release from the hospital, my life underwent a profound transformation. Nathaniel's near-death experience and miracle of recovery had changed not only my worldview, but also the way I lived each day. The first big change came in my relationship with Nathaniel's father. Even though we planned to raise our son together, it became clear to me that our paths needed to separate. There was no anger or resentment in this decision, just a clear understanding that our spiritual journeys were different. He had a hard time understanding my new perspective on life, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. What I had experienced was something that words could hardly describe. I then decided that I would raise Nathaniel alone. I didn't feel truly alone, though. The certainty of the divine presence in our lives was constant and comforting. Every challenge I faced as a single mother, the sleepless nights, the financial worries, the moments of doubt, was met with new strength and serenity. My relationship with Nathaniel was deeply influenced by my experience. From the first days, I talked to him about the unconditional love I had experienced. Even when he was just a baby, unable to understand my words, I felt that he somehow understood the essence of what I shared. Our bond went beyond the physical. It was a spiritual connection that grew stronger every day. As Nathaniel grew older, I began incorporating spiritual teachings into our daily routine. These were not formal or dogmatic lessons, but simple conversations about love, compassion, and the interconnectedness of all things. I taught him to meditate from an early age, showing him how to find that inner light that I had experienced so vividly. My own spiritual practice has deepened. Meditation, prayer, and study of spiritual texts from various traditions have become an integral part of my daily life. I no longer identified with a specific religion, but sought the universal wisdom that I believed was present in all spiritual traditions. This new perspective has affected every aspect of my life. My job, which was once just a way to make money, has become an opportunity to practice compassion and unconditional love. I began to see every interaction, every challenge as a chance for spiritual growth. Friends and family noticed the change in me. Some thought I had changed too much, that I was obsessed with spirituality. Others were attracted to the peace and joy that emanated from me, seeking to understand the source of this transformation. I learned to accept both reactions with love and understanding, recognizing that each person has their own journey. One of the biggest lessons I learned and tried to pass on to Nathaniel was the importance of forgiveness. Looking back on the mistakes and difficult decisions I had made in my life, including past miscarriages, I no longer felt guilt or shame. I had experienced such complete and unconditional forgiveness during my near-death experience that I could now truly forgive myself and extend that forgiveness to others. This ability to forgive has transformed my relationships. Old hurts and resentments dissolved in light of this new understanding. I realized that every person in my life, even those who had hurt me deeply, had been instrumental in my spiritual growth and evolution. As Nathaniel grew, he saw in him a wisdom and understanding that went beyond his years. I often found myself looking at him in amazement, seeing how he naturally practiced the love and compassion that I worked so hard to cultivate. It was as if he had come into the world with a stronger connection to that divine source than I had experienced. However, raising a child alone, especially with this new spiritual outlook, was not without challenges. There were times when I felt misunderstood or isolated from the world around me. Society was not always prepared to accept or understand someone who saw life through such a different lens. But with each challenge, with each moment of doubt, I remembered that light, that unconditional love that I had experienced. This memory gave me strength to continue, to stay true to my path, even when it seemed lonely or difficult. Over time, I began to feel a calling to share my experience more widely. It wasn't just about telling my story, but about offering hope and a new perspective to those who were struggling with questions of life and death, faith and purpose. I felt like I had been given a precious gift, and that it was my responsibility to share it with the world. As Nathaniel grew older and our life stabilized, I felt a growing pull to share my experience with a wider audience. I started small, sharing my story in local support groups for people who had had near-death experiences or were dealing with grief. The response I received was overwhelming. People came up to me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for hearing a story that gave them hope and a new perspective on life and death. I realized that my experience had the power to comfort, inspire, and transform lives. Encouraged by this positive response, I decided to expand my reach. I started giving talks at churches, community centers, and even at some spirituality conferences. My message was simple but profound. There is an unconditional love that awaits us beyond this life, a love that can guide and sustain us even in the most difficult moments of our earthly journey. It was during one of these lectures that I had the idea of creating a YouTube channel. Nathaniel, then 10 years old, was the one who encouraged me to take this step. "Mom," he said, "you need to share your story with more people. YouTube can help you reach people all over the world." With the help of Nathaniel, who had a natural aptitude for technology, I launched the Eternal Life Plan channel. The name was chosen to reflect my belief that our existence does not end with physical death, but continues on a spiritual plane where we are enveloped by divine love. At first, the channel was simple, just me, sitting in front of the camera, sharing my experience and the lessons I had learned. I talked about the unconditional love I had experienced, the peace I had found on the other side, and how this experience had transformed my everyday life. To my surprise, the channel started gaining followers quickly. People from different parts of the world, from different religious and cultural backgrounds, connected with my message. I received hundreds of comments and messages from people sharing their own experiences, asking questions, and expressing gratitude for finding hope through my words. As the channel grew, I expanded the content. In addition to talking about my own experience, I began to cover topics such as meditation, forgiveness, unconditional love, and how to incorporate spirituality into everyday life. It invited experts in near-death experiences, psychologists and spiritual leaders for interviews, creating a space for open and respectful dialogue on issues of life, death, and spirituality. Nathaniel, as he grew older, became an increasingly active part of the channel. His unique perspective as someone who had grown up with these teachings since birth added a valuable dimension to our discussions. He frequently participated in the videos, sharing his own reflections and spiritual experiences. The channel's impact on our lives was profound. We received messages from people saying that our words had saved their lives, that they had found a new purpose, or that they had lost their fear of death. Families wrote to us telling us how our videos had helped them cope with the loss of a loved one. Doctors and nurses shared how our message had transformed the way they cared for terminally ill patients. But it wasn't all praise. We also faced criticism and skepticism. Some accused us of spreading false hope or exploiting people's vulnerabilities. Others questioned the veracity of my experience, seeking scientific or psychological explanations for what I had experienced. I learned to handle this criticism with grace and understanding. I didn't try to convince anyone of the truth of my experience. I just shared what I had experienced and the transformations it had brought to my life. He believed that those who were ready to hear the message would receive it, while respecting the right of others to have their own beliefs and opinions. The Eternal Life Plan channel has become more than just a way to share my story. It has become a global community of people seeking a deeper understanding of life, death, and the unconditional love that unites us all. It was the fulfillment of the promise I had made during my near-death experience, a way to bring some of that divine light into the world. As I look back on the years that have passed since my near-death experience, I marvel at the journey I have been on. What began as a moment of crisis, an emergency cesarean section that almost took my life and that of my son, turned into the catalyst for a profound transformation that has affected not only my life, but the lives of thousands of people around the world. Nathaniel, now a young adult, has grown up to become a remarkable individual. Your intuitive understanding of unconditional love and the interconnectedness of all things continues to amaze and inspire me. Seeing him use this wisdom to make a difference in the world, whether through his volunteer work, his own spiritual explorations, or his continued participation on our channel, fills me with indescribable joy and gratitude. The Eternal Life Plan channel has grown beyond our most optimistic expectations. With millions of subscribers and views, it has become a global platform for discussions about life, death, spirituality, and unconditional love. We have received invitations to speak at international conferences, participate in television programs, and even consult with medical institutions about palliative care and spiritual support for terminally ill patients. But beyond the external success, what touches me most are the individual stories of transformation that we continue to receive. People who found peace after years of grief, individuals who overcame their fear of death, families who reconciled after years of conflict. Each story is a powerful reminder of the impact a single experience can have when shared with love and authenticity. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that my near-death experience was just the beginning. It was the moment the seed was planted, but the real miracle has been the continued unfolding of this experience in my everyday life. Each day brings new opportunities to practice the unconditional love I experienced, to forgive more deeply, to see the divinity in each person I encounter. I can't say it's always easy. I still face challenges, moments of doubt and difficult days. But the memory of that light, that overwhelming love I experienced, continues to sustain me. I know deep down in my being that no matter what happens in this life, we are all enveloped in a love that transcends our human understanding. My message to those reading or listening to my story is simple. Do not fear death, because on the other side there is a love that surpasses anything we can imagine in this life. But most importantly, don't wait until death to experience this love. He is available to us here and now, in every moment, in every breath. I invite you to open your heart to this unconditional love. Practice forgiveness of yourself and others. Cultivate compassion. See the divinity in every person you meet. Remember that we are all part of something much bigger than we can comprehend with our limited minds. My near-death experience showed me that life is precious and that every moment is an opportunity to grow, love, and evolve. We don't know how long we have on this earth, but we can choose to live each day with purpose, gratitude, and love. As I continue my journey, sharing my story and the lessons I've learned, I feel deep gratitude for each person who has crossed my path. Each of you, whether through a kind word, a challenge that made me grow, or simply by being open to hearing my story, is part of this incredible journey. I end with a certainty that I carry in my heart. The love I experienced during my near-death experience is not something distant or unattainable. It is here, now, available to all of us. It is the fabric of which the universe is made, the essence of who we truly are. My hope is that by sharing my story, I can help others awaken to this fundamental, life-changing truth. May each of you feel, know, and live this unconditional love in your lives, because in the end, that's what really matters. That's what remains. That's what we are. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.